Okay. There we go. Okay, we are.
Are we live?
No.
Who else just logged on?
Darren, he doesn't have. Okay, I'm going to mute you guys quickly. Okay, guys, we are going to go live now. Okay, good evening. Hello, everyone. Apologies for the slight delay. As always, technology likes to play up when you need it most. Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome to SEMLI. SEMLI is Sports, Exercise, Medicine and Lifestyle Institute, and this is our next installment of the live Q&As. And tonight we're talking about exercise and training during lockdown. It's moving into week 4, I'm assuming, week 4, week 5. Yeah, week 4 of lockdown at the moment. And I hope everyone is surviving. And if you're not, go back and look at last week's live Q&A. They've got some great information about how to survive lockdown with our resident sports psychologist, Matalise. But for tonight, talking about exercise and training during lockdown, let me introduce my team who's with us tonight. We have our head physiotherapist, Carel Viljoen. Welcome, Carel.
Thank you, Shona.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And along with that is one of our senior sports scientists, Devlin Eyden.
Hey, Shona, how's it going?
Good. So just a little bit of background on these guys. Carel is a bit of a trail junkie. Ran some crazy miles on the trail. We don't hold that against him. Yeah, Carel, thanks for joining. And Carel's also tackling quite the PhD at the moment. So I'm glad to see he's still alive and with us during lockdown, and we haven't lost him to the depths of the PhD. And then also Dev's one of our senior sports scientists. Dev specializes in most of our endurance events. He's also worked in swimming and triathlon, and is a Australian level 2 certified cycling coach. So yeah, thanks guys for joining us tonight. And just so everyone's aware, the kind of topics that we're going to explore tonight are, I mean, we've seen things, some crazy kind of ideas during lockdown around training, and things for like people accomplishing marathons around their gardens, all the way across to like people smashing 100 kettlebell swings for a certain amount of time, or some random handstand push-ups with trying to take your shirts on and off. And I think as a team, we really were just, trying to decide how much this is effective, what is effective, is there risks to these sorts of things. And so, yeah, those are some of the topics we're going to cover. We're going to really dive into the detraining effects of it, of lockdown, and how much fitness are people really losing during this time. We'll then dive a little bit deeper into, how much is good training to be doing, what is safe during this time. We'll look at individual sports and team sports, and perhaps the different dynamics that people are experiencing there. And we'll also touch a little bit on if you're completely inactive, and perhaps what the effects are at that point in time. This is obviously for people who perhaps, don't have access to indoor trainers like a treadmill or an indoor bike, and perhaps are lucky enough to have just an area to move around. But, so maybe let's jump in. I don't want to spend too much time me baffling. I mean, really, we've got Dev and Carel with us. Dev, I'm going to start with you, and I think the number one question we've been getting really around this time is how much fitness are people losing, as we go into week 4 of lockdown? I mean, what is the actual detraining effect?
Yeah, Sean, so that's a great question. I know I've been dealing with it quite a bit, with some concerns from some of my athletes as well. So it is definitely one of the popular questions out there at the moment. Look, detraining is something in the scenario that we do find ourselves in. Unfortunately, detraining is a reality. Like anything, if you take a stimulus away, you are going to have an effect of detraining. How much you're going to detrain over a period of time, especially something like us, we 3.5, 4 weeks in now, that's largely going to be dependent on a couple of factors. So firstly, it's going to be dependent on what your current level of fitness, or what your level of fitness was going into the lockdown phase. Your genetics, things like your age, as well as your training age, meaning how long you've been training for. And then also the specificity of the kind of training that you have been doing. So those are some of the factors that will actually affect the rate at which your detraining is going to happen. Obviously, if you have a long or an older training age, so meaning you've been training for a really long time, it will have probably a slightly slower effect on your detraining effect as what it would if you had been doing a couple of months of training for an event, for instance, and now went into lockdown. You're obviously going to lose a little bit of your gains a little bit quicker. As I mentioned with the training stimulus, whether it's a neuromuscular strength stimulus or whether it's an endurance training that you have been doing, if you take that away and do complete rest, so let's say for these 4 weeks currently you've been doing absolutely nothing, you've been lying on the couch enjoying some Netflix, you are going to have quite a severe drop in that detraining phase over the time. Hopefully most of us have been doing stuff, and obviously we're going to be touching quite a bit on it tonight, but have some sort of training that has been happening will definitely have a slower effect on that detraining phase. From a physiological point of view, or factors that get affected by detraining is something like your plasma volume, for instance. You'll have a decrease in plasma volume, which your plasma volume is something that helps your thermoregulation for exercise. You're going to have if you've taken intensity out of your training, you might have a VO2 or a anaerobic capacity drop. If you've taken endurance out of your training, your aerobic capacity is going to have a slight drop. So it sounds quite negative, but it is a reality of it. However, there is quite a bit of science out, and there have been quite a few studies on this topic. And a lot of it tends to point to, if you've done as little as 20%, so some of the figures that I've seen in some papers and that, if you've done as little as 20% of your usual training volume per week in these last couple of weeks, you could actually reduce your training effect, your detraining effect, by up to 50%. So that's quite a big saving. I mean, something as little as, if you've been doing 10 hours of training a week, and now you bring it down to 2 hours of training a week, you're only losing around about 50% of that capacity that you had. So that, for me, is a little bit of a silver lining more than anything else. It's not necessarily all doom and gloom. And hopefully, if you have had that little bit of consistency in your training in the last couple of weeks, you're going to have maintained a relatively decent level of fitness for you to get back into it when we start opening up and are able to get out training for your sport, your event, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think many people are, or not many people are aware of how much detraining is taking place. And so I think people are freaking out a little bit and really smashing every kind of online session, every high intensity session, doing all sorts of things they haven't necessarily done before, when really you have to be doing absolutely nothing to have a massive detraining kind of effect. taking that into account, Dev, then what should the goal be during this time? What should guys be focused on? And maybe take it from an individual sports point of view, runner, cyclist, sort of things that we'll touch on the team sports a little bit later. But what should the goal be, and what would the structure of a normal week kind of look like for these guys then?
Yeah, so look, I suppose it is quite difficult because it's largely going to be dependent on the individual and what access they have to training. So, for example, I'm a cyclist. I haven't got a bike here. I haven't got my smart trainer with me. Unfortunately, I haven't been on the bike for a couple of weeks. However, I have been now focusing a little bit on the strength stuff, which is something that I tend to neglect in my full training slightly, as well as trying to get out doing a little bit of running here and there where I can around the garden, the complex and that. I suppose the way forward is hopefully in the last couple of weeks, you have been doing some form of training. I think going forward now is about, firstly, I think just to touch on, there probably is still a little bit of uncertainty as to when things are going to open, when we have dates available for events that we might be working towards. So I think that leaves things in still a bit of a gray area and a bit of question marks there. However, if we do come out of lockdown at the end of next week, it does allow us to probably have a little bit of freedom where we can start introducing that training again. And I think it needs to be a slow progression or a slower start back into training. People need to realize, especially if you have taken quite a knock in these last couple of weeks, it's not something that you're going to be able to jump straight in, whether you're a cyclist or a runner or whatever sport it might be, and be able to go flat out again. So we need to understand that, okay, we've lost a couple of weeks. We haven't lost 3 or 4 months. So it's just been a couple of weeks. So we need to take a step back in our training and slowly start to build it back up. And I can tell you, we can probably be back to full training within about 3 or 4 weeks of opening up again. We should be able to, at least, maybe not at the highest intensity or peaking, but we should be back into a really good rhythm in terms of loading the volume back onto our training.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. I think, Carel, if I can bring you in here, Dev's going to be talking us away. So let me pull you in. A lot of the training, like I said, I think guys are trying to do everything. They're jumping from high intensity stuff, things they've never really done before. So they're really doing things and bringing on a different load they haven't done before. So what is some of the effects of that? Why is that an injury risk necessarily?
Yeah, Shona, you can look at it from a lot of angles, and just to start off, that any sport has an inherent risk. If I run out on a rugby field, there's risk involved in sport. So it's nice how Devlin now just made us at ease a bit with, we won't get that quickly deconditioned. And I think we need to understand as well, we don't have to make risk bigger than it is, but there's risk involved with what we're doing. So first priority is we have to keep active while considering the risk. And the risk comes with, if you go and do something different. So from conditioning, you must prepare your body for doing something. So if I'm a distance runner, I keep in a linear pattern most of the times. And if I start introducing multi-directional stuff, I must do it gradually. So that's over time we do it, and that's our lower risk for injury. The reason for it is, if we take a muscle, for instance, a muscle takes tensile force. And if I do it over time and gradually increase load or force through the muscle, then I'm not going to get injured. There will be adaptation that will happen. I'll get stronger and I'll be able to handle that load. But if it happens overnight or rapid transition, that's where we have a risk for overuse injury or an acute injury like a muscle tear. And that's not typically what we see in stuff like garden running, where sure, you're doing 200 laps of up and down running, and you're trying to alternate the direction of turning, but you're still turning. And you haven't been turning around in your life before like this. You've just been running straight the whole time. And that's what we're seeing, like at the pelvis level, your buttock muscles, the tendons starting to flare up and getting overuse injuries like that. So it comes down to slow progression, slow loading of any anatomical structure will prevent injury. And now we're all forced to do something different. And so now we must just keep in mind, like Dev said, you're not going to get deconditioned that fast. So don't now, because you're a distance runner, go and smash high intensity training the whole time.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, I come from a football background, but I'm an endurance runner now. And I mean, if I got back onto the football field, my agility would definitely be taking strain. And essentially, that's kind of what we're asking ourselves to do when we are doing this garden running is, constant 180 turns or even 90-degree turns. And as you say, I think, physiologically, you're not used to that. And that brings on a bit of a risk. Maybe just a bit of housekeeping, guys. I mean, I didn't really mention, I know I can see we've got a couple of people watching, which is awesome. Welcome if you've just joined us. If you have any questions as we're going along, please feel free to drop them in the comments there. We'll try and get to as many of them as we can. So anything to do along the lines of injuries that are being picked up while you're in lockdown, what kind of training would be ideal to be doing, please feel free to drop those in the comment section then, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Carel, you mentioned the garden running side of things, and I mean, I've seen some guys doing 100-milers in their gardens, and like just even marathons. I mean, you and I were talking offline around like people starting to do their first marathon. You have never done a marathon before and are now venturing into that into their gardens. I mean, you touched on a bit of the physiological risks, but I mean, can you maybe talk a little bit more around that and why you think that isn't necessarily a good idea? Let me just put as a disclaimer, I think if you're doing it as a once-off from a charity point of view or something, I mean, we're not saying don't do these things. We just want to bring to light some of the specific risks involved.
No, as you said, Shona, we don't want to stop people from being physically active. So if you're out there and you're doing it, yes, great stuff for it. It's just something, like you said, if you're trying, we do see guys now trying their first marathons. And I don't know why you're trying your first marathon at home. If you feel safe in your own living room and running through your living room into the garden, I don't know if that's giving you a safety for that, but you have to consider it's a longer distance. And we're not going to talk about illness tonight because we don't have a medical doctor on the show, but even there's reasons that there's medical staff at races. There's dehydration risk, there's renal failure, orientation. So it's just a thing where be careful, firstly, if you're doing ultras in your backyard. If you've been doing, like Ryan Sands has run a 100-miler, but Ryan Sands has done it multiple times and he's comfortable with that. Just be careful if you're doing your own ultras because there's complication involved. Then again, as we said, running in a garden, it's good to keep on running. Just be careful. You don't want to exit lockdown with an overuse injury. If we talk about something like a tendinopathy, that's where you get overuse of a tendon. For us as physios, that's a difficult thing to sort out. It can easily take from a month to 3 months to get you fully back into running or cycling or what you're doing. So it will be stupid now to try and push to keep your conditioning going, your fitness going, and you exit lockdown with some kind of overuse injury. So it's important, like Dev said, that maintain, but try to avoid injury at this stage. I think just to maybe touch on team sports as well, there's a neuromuscular component, a neuromuscular control component involved. That means when I sidestep or when I go into a big tackle in rugby, there's a bit of skill involved. So there's a bit of brain-body involvement there as well. And I'm not tackling at this stage, and I'm not sidestepping that much. In netball, I'm not jumping and landing and twisting on my knee that much. I'm keeping my fitness going. So it's always just to keep that in mind as well for when we exit lockdown, to maybe take a gradual approach to this as well.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to tackle exiting lockdown more towards the end of it. And I hope some people will come with some questions around that as well. And I think your points are pertinent around the team sports and the neuromuscular side of it for sure. But if we go back to this garden running thing, because I'm an endurance runner and I was supposed to run to Oceans and obviously it got cancelled. And so I've been running a little bit around the garden, but at most I think I've done around 3Ks. But Dev, I'm pull you in here and just what is like some of the effects on the physiology? Why is that happening? That, I find my pace is slower, my heart rate is through the roof, and I mean it's 3 kilometers. I'm fit enough to be running 56 or 58 Ks. What's going on physiologically as to why that may be happening, and how do we sort of fix that? Should I still continue with that, or are there measures in place that we can do to sort of combat the high heart rate and slow pace?
So Sean, this is also a really good point. And again, like Carel says, we suddenly, I mean, people, I've also seen a couple of clips where people are running through their living rooms, up and down their back stairs, jumping over their dog, over their cat, dodging furniture in the house. Now, all of that is very intermittent stop-start type of work. And again, I'm focusing largely around running here because that's most of what's happening or what we've seen happening at the moment. But it's very intermittent. So we're now changing our energy systems that we typically would be working in when we're out for a long endurance type of run, where we know the heart rate is relatively low and we can control our pacing, whatever the zones might be, or the different intensities that we're working at. Now suddenly we're running around the house where it's obstacles we're having to avoid, or you're doing 180 degree or 90 degree turns, which is a deceleration and an acceleration again. And all that sort of stuff is something that's got a constant ease off, push off sort of effect on your training intensity, so your external load that's being put on your body. And as a result, your internal load from a heart rate point of view starts to pick up. And that's why you'll probably find a relatively irregular heart rate. And I mean irregular in the sense of it's up and down consistently, as well as you constantly feeling that your pace might be out. It's hard to actually get into a rhythm. For anyone who's run and has run more than a couple of 100 meters around the garden will know that it takes you a little bit of time to warm up, to get into a rhythm and to get to a consistent steady state. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just it's a lot more taxing on the body from an external workload, being a stop start, maybe a jump, maybe a 1 or 2 up and down stairs. I mean, I actually saw a thing the other day, a guy was pretty much climbing Everest. Yes, he was doing it for charity, but in his parents' house, 1 flight of stairs, and he had calculated that he needs to do 8 hours a day up and down the stairs, and it should take him between 5 and 6 days to climb Everest. So, I mean, it's things like that that we're really not used to. And it's it's a completely different load on the body. There are risks involved. And again, I'm not saying don't do it, but I do think we should limit it. If running is a thing that you're trying to do and you are a runner, I still think you shouldn't try and do 2-hour long runs. You should probably minimize it to about 25 to 35 minutes at most. And maybe try and do that with a day in between to rest, maybe focus a little bit on like Pilates or some strength stuff, something in between, but don't try and hammer away and clock up miles, big miles every single day, and try and think you're going to come out of lockdown in a better state that you went into it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I was going to touch on that next and kind of get to, so yeah, we can't really be building aerobic endurance. I mean, you mentioned with the detraining, that's one of the things that does tend to go. But so this is a great opportunity for you to then, build on strength. So one of the things that I think we could consider doing is adapting that training. So if you are going to be running, I think your advice is perfect. 20 to 30 minutes every alternate day, so you're allowing the rest and recovery from there. I think just working on things that we don't normally get the time to work on. Your runners are constantly complaining they don't get time to do strength work, so now is the perfect opportunity to do that. And
I think just to sort of touch on Carel's point, Carel, maybe when you say people are sort of feeling safe, maybe trying to run at home, do you not think that they might find that the fridge is close and see that as a water point in a snack station? Being able to run around their kitchen into their fridge every now and again.
Definitely, yeah. No, that's definitely a thing. And I've checked that the video of Ryan Sands. It's such a nice aid station he has there, on his nice dining table. So I think I almost, because I also get bored at home, sitting the whole day and in meetings, and I feel like I can exercise 3 times per day now because I have enough energy. I'm not, so it's easy to fall into that trap. But yeah, the home gives you some safety.
Yeah, let's leave the nutrition stuff for when we bring on our nutritionist, which is probably going to be next week's live Q&A. We'll leave the important questions around snacking and running back and forth to the fridge up to them. Sorry, I see my glass of wine. Well, it's not a glass of wine. I see my wine glass here appearing in the screen, and I just got a message from a friend accusing me that this is wine. This is the 2nd week in a row. Last week I got accused of having wine in a coffee cup. This time I've put it in a clear cup or clear glass that everyone can see that it is water, and that we are hydrating like good sports scientists and sports physiotherapists here. So, Carel, your points about the loading, I think is awesome. And I want to touch a little bit on the load progression. So, you know, if you're someone who now is a runner or a cyclist or whatever sport, even a team sports environment, and perhaps coming, you know, from doing a lot of field-based work or a lot of long, slow distance running, and now we're doing a lot of strength sort of stuff. What would be a safe kind of progression? Dev, and feel free also to jump in here. What is the kind of progression? Should people be progressing over these, you know, initially lockdown was only going to be 3 weeks. It's now obviously been extended. We don't know what's going to happen when Mr. President addresses us again tomorrow evening. But what is a safe progression, and how should people be doing that?
Shona, yeah, so it's a difficult question because there's so many sports and so many individuals that we take from it. I think it's important to try and differentiate between team sports and then also endurance running. If you can keep your running going in garden running, or if you're doing cycling and you do have a watt bike where you can continue, then I think try to maintain what you have and don't try to get too much gain now. Obviously, I'll throw it back to Dev now, just for the injury risk of it. We talked now about garden running, but just on team sports as well. Well, let's keep to endurance running. Like myself now my garden is too small, so I'm back to sit-ups and push-ups. So we don't want the sit-ups and push-ups to keep you at the same place. You should be, if you're doing 10 push-ups now, try to do 15 within 2 days, or you can progress, obviously. But just from the fitness point of view, try not. But again, we need to differentiate in the sense of, you get a lot of runners that like to post their stuff on Strava. The race is not the big thing for them. It's the community and the sharing. And so we should not discourage people from doing crazy stuff in their gardens, because if that's the thing they want to do, then cool. But if you want to get out of lockdown and you want to go race again, or you're in a thick sports team and you want to get out of lockdown and perform well in your team again, I think then it's important to not push the gains too much in load. Try to keep it down, maintain what you can. But there's no specific, you have to go on an individual level for this to take it down. But Dev, maybe you can maybe help us with sets and progression from there. But it's very difficult. I encourage my patients at this stage, if you talk about rehabilitation, I encourage them to check in with me often. Because even in rehabilitation, the injured guys, it's very difficult. We don't have equipment at home. So they go from doing bodyweight exercises to the next big thing is you can lift the couch. So the jump in load is where we have risk for injury. And that's our big issue at this stage. I haven't been doing push-ups and sit-ups too much. I can't run. Now I'm jumping to a different type of loading, which is the higher risk for injury. Yeah. What do you think, Dev?
Yeah, Carl. So I agree with you 100%. It is about sort of, firstly, if you are an athlete and you have a goal, or hopefully have a goal soon when we come out of things, it is just about management and looking after yourself now. Like you say, you don't want to come out with injuries. You aren't losing a lot in this time. Guys, we need to remember, look, we actually did a piece recently on sort of the lockdown and the effects on it. And obviously with last week's Q&A as well, there is a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress from a work point of view, what's happening, where we're going. And exercise training seems to be a really good release. I mean, that's how people are going to blow off a little bit of steam. Now, the only problem with it is, and like we've touched on, is trying to do too much and trying to do too much of different things, because we're seeing this guy's doing something on Instagram and this guy's doing something on Facebook, and we need to try and do that. So it is about management from an athlete point of view. And then at the same time, the risk of, yes, try something new. If you're not necessarily an athlete training for an event and you want to keep fit and you want to keep active, like Carl says, we're not trying to say stay away from it. However, you just need to be cautious about what you're doing as well. You can't try and take on 100 burpees in a session if you've never done a burpee before. Or you're used to doing 5 burpees in a session and now you're trying to do 100 in a session because someone challenged you to it. And it's really not about that. It's about being smart, being selective about the kind of exercises or the kind of programs that you are picking, and maybe do a little bit of background and research into where is that program coming from, who's putting that program together, and just, again, be smart about what our selection process is in what we're going to be doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think there's a couple of questions coming through here, guys. So I want to jump to them. Debbie is asking, Devin, I'm going to direct this one at you. Is 5 kilometers a day still okay if you're doing yoga and strength as well, or should the running still have a day in between?
So, Debbie, I think on this point, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, look, I don't know the level of runner you are. So 5Ks a day, I don't necessarily know what kind of times you're doing those 5Ks in. But the 5Ks, I'm assuming you are restricted to the kind of space that you're doing it in. So again, that comes back to whether you're doing it in a garden or if there's constant turning around. So what I would recommend doing is maybe just in this lockdown period, and touch wood, if all goes according to plan, we've got a week and a half to go, just bring that down to doing a run every second day. You can limit it, don't necessarily worry too much about the distance, but maybe limit it to time rather. So 20 to 30 minutes of running every second day, and then carry on with your yoga and your strength classes in between. Don't be scared to throw in a rest day though. So there is time where you need to focus on recovery, and don't be scared of rest. And that's the one thing people feel like, well, I'm sitting around doing nothing, I need to be training. This is really a good time for us to be getting some rest and rejuvenation and regeneration of the body as well. So yeah, I do think, Debbie, maybe just tone off slightly, run every second day, limit it to a time, and feel free to carry on with the strength stuff again, provided you are progressing slowly enough with the strength, if strength is something you haven't done before.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in there as well, Dave, I think you're spot on. I would measure your runs, Debbie, according to time and not distance, for one reason specifically, that I think the GPS units, they definitely are not as accurate as they are when you're running for longer kind of distances. And so what is 5Ks today, and there can be very big variance with that. And just from a injury sort of perspective, running according to time would be better than running to chasing a distance. And yeah, I think Dev's spot on with that advice. Carel, another question here from, sorry, I just want to see, it's from Simone. What's your opinion on jump rope and skipping exercises for home training, especially for the team sports?
Yeah, again, Shona, so I want to link with Dev, where it depends on what your background is with skipping. If you've never done skipping before with jumping rope, it can be a lot of load on your Achilles and your calf complex. So you can easily end up with an overuse injury of your Achilles tendon, or even a small tear of your calf muscle if you haven't been doing this before. So obviously skipping is a lot of jumps. So again, it comes down to what's your base and taking it from there. So I think that's a big question that people need to ask. The new thing I'm going to take on. So I decided push-ups and sit-ups, and this is the stuff I'm going to do. Now, when was the last time I did this? If it was 2 years ago, then cool. Start gradually. And if you feel you decided I'm going to do 3 sets of 10, into my second set, I feel a bit of a niggle in my shoulder. Call it and say, okay, for today, this is enough. Don't try and hit goals now. I decided I'm going to jump rope now for half an hour. But try to limit it. If you get into it and you start to feel a niggle, stop. Or if you don't feel a niggle and the next day you wake up and there's massive stiffness of your Achilles or your calf, then you know that was too much. So again, it's very individual. It depends on the individual. But I won't discourage it if you have a bit of a base of been doing it before.
Yeah, I think
just want to say one last thing as well is that we didn't realize how much Dev touched now on sitting and getting recovery. We didn't realize how much we sit in this time. You go from meeting to doing research to sitting on the couch. You're not actually walking more than 10 meters almost. So you must also think about the muscular stiffness building up and then going straight from that into the jump rope. So it's all factors to consider. So yes, jump rope, if you have a nice base of it, or if you want to start jumping rope now, cool. Just start easily and gradually with it. And same approach like the running. Do it once now, skip a day, do it the following day again. Yeah.
Where would the bigger risk be for jump rope? Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a physio, but shin splints, those kinds of pains, is that really where people would be feeling that kind of injury coming up from skipping?
Yeah, we primarily see the Achilles tendon. We talked about loading. So if a load is big enough, meaning I'm a rugby player, I run towards the try line and a big fat guy jumps on my back, then that's an acute big load. So I have a risk of tearing my calf muscle or even rupturing an Achilles tendon. Where small loads, but just constant, increase our risk for overuse injuries. That's where we see this tendinopathies or tendonitis as it's known out there. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry, I mixed it up. That question was actually from Leanne. Simone's question, and Dev, I'm going to put this one on you. How many high intensity interval sessions, so how many HIIT sessions and or Pilates sessions would you recommend per week in this current sort of environment that we're in?
Look, I think that's tricky again, because it's what level are you at? So if you have been doing high intensity work, you probably could get away with doing 2 to 3 sessions. I still don't see it being necessary. Remember my point earlier on where I said if we reduce the training load, we can do it as little as 20% a week. So the kind of high intensity that you might be forced to do now in lockdown will be completely different to the kind of high intensity you might have done, whether it's on a spinning bike or out on a ride or running intervals or whatever it might be. So I think the biggest thing would be, firstly, let's think about what those high intensity sessions are going to be. And then I think we can restrict it down to 1 session a week. You should be fine. If you are a seasoned athlete or someone who is accustomed to doing 2 to 3 intensity sessions a week, whether it's interval training or speed training and you have access to do that on a treadmill, for instance, or an indoor trainer, I think then you find to maybe stick with your training program doing a second session later in the week. But I would be cautious. It's largely going to be dependent on how you're feeling, how much recovery you get, and what else you're doing that might affect that intensity session. So if you're going to do a strength session and then you want to do an intensity session the next day, you're probably going to have an effect on it if you're feeling stiff and you've done strength stuff that you're not used to doing. And then tomorrow you want to try and do a high intensity interval session. That in itself, you're probably not even going to get the desired benefit or the desired outcome from that session, because you might not be able to do it to its best quality. So I think just be cautious around that. But guys, I'm trying to drive the point home. We hopefully not here for too much longer, in the sense that don't panic around it if you do cut it down to 1 session a week.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. There are some more questions coming through, and we will definitely try to get to them. If we don't, I'll definitely get Dev, Carel, and myself to jump on tomorrow morning and answer them, because we're listening to our psychologist from last week who said we shouldn't be doing things, we should keep good boundaries with time and so on. So we'll definitely be jumping on it and answering any questions we do miss. I have one here that I think will lead us into our next topic as well, as it comes from our netball coach, Jenny. She's asking, why would it be easier for me to run counterclockwise in my house compared to clockwise? Carel, I'm gonna pass that one over to you.
Sure, that can be multiple. No, you guys can't see the screen, but everyone else is laughing and throwing this question to me. There can be multiple reasons. Easier in the sense of, I don't know if she refers to fitness-wise or pain-wise, or
I think she's probably just saying that it's easier for her to turn on one side, like she's running one way. It just probably feels a little bit easier.
Yeah, so again, that can be multiple reasons. Just on the turning, if you turn, there is lumbopelvic stability involved, meaning even though you don't feel it that much, there's gluteal muscles contracting on multi-directional patterns there. So there's muscles involved. Maybe the one side is a bit stronger than the other side, and it's a bit more comfortable. Just be careful to not turn to that one side the whole time. I tell the guys, our practice is open at this stage, and the only injuries I'm seeing at this stage is garden running injuries, and it comes from turning the whole time. So I tell the guys, run to your point, almost come to a complete stop, turn around, and then go from there back. But again, difficult question to answer. Maybe the one side is a bit more stronger than the other side, but it comes down to the stability involved. If I use an example like Wade van Niekerk, he's 400-meter world champion. He's trained to be fast in mostly linear patterns. And then for the Springboks, he played that warm-up game, the touch rugby game, and first sidestep his ACL went in his knee. It's just that he's not conditioned for directional changes. And that can be similar. Maybe our netball coach is also not doing too much directional changes. I don't know, but it's a difficult question. But you must come in and we'll check it out.
Yeah, exactly. We'll also get our netball strength and conditioning coach to fire up some good strength work there for you, Jenny. Coming from that netball kind of conversation, I want to focus a little bit on the team sports. And Carel, you mentioned a bit about this earlier in terms of the neuromuscular kind of changes that are happening. And then if the guys are in lockdown, perhaps they're missing out on so much. I mean, we're not going to talk about the social side of missing out on a team environment. Perhaps, in a rugby sort of situation, understanding your senses, understanding each other, those sorts of things, but really more from like a neuromuscular sort of, or physiological specific, and the effect that might have on something like a inherent risk for ACL injuries or something like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I'll use netball as an example, as our netball coach is online. But it's neuromuscular control, just to bring it down and let's include proprioception with it as well. While I'm trying to catch a ball in a high pressure situation and I'm landing on my leg, there must be control of my knee. If my knee falls too far inwards, I have a high risk for rupturing my ACL. And that comes from training and conditioning, doing it over and over again. The body will do it better. Now we're in lockdown, and sure, we're doing our exercises, but we're probably not being placed in that type of scenarios the whole time. So we must just be careful when we go back in after a lockdown. We must be careful, firstly, to maybe expose our players a little bit more to this type of scenarios in less pressure situations, and then before we go back into tournaments. Luckily, I think the tournaments is not going to start straight out of lockdown. To take it from there. Shona, I just want to ask the other question that you asked. Sorry, I just missed that.
I don't think I did. I think you nailed it. Well done, Carel. Good job. Well, we were going to say that you did because I can't remember my other question. So that's fine. I think you're right. And I think, look, I mean, the coaches obviously understand their sports really, really well. And so we don't claim to be the experts in understanding the technical side of all of those things. So, but yeah, I think, and you say like seasons won't come back or games and tournaments and competitions won't come back as quickly as straight out of lockdown. But yeah, just perhaps elaborate a little bit more on that and around, how we could safely bring our athletes back.
I just want to say with injury, we have good evidence to show that if you get injured, that you lose a lot of neuromuscular control. That's why you have to go through rehabilitation and build it back up to prevent re-injury in the future. We don't have great evidence to tell us in a lockdown situation how much you're going to lose. We don't think it's much. Same like Dev said with the conditioning part. We don't think it's going to be that much. But if you put it into context, the risk and reward, if I use rugby, for example, if I'm not used to tackling, the two centers take tackles that's quite reactive. And if you're not used to that situation and you get your head on the wrong side, you have a chance for a neck injury. Netball, if you're jumping and landing high pressure situations, you have a chance of rupturing an ACL. So again, I would say let's rather take the overkill and use a few weeks after lockdown to slowly get back into it. To tell you definitely there's a risk to get injured of not doing this for a few weeks. I cannot tell you that definitely. We know in injury, yes. But in this situation, we don't know. But let's rather take the safer approach and the overkill and slowly get back into it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask the question, what lockdown, Mr. Ramaphosa comes tomorrow and he says, guys, we're going to go into a softer lockdown. That means that, perhaps no groups, no more than 20 can start being together and guys start training. And I was just about to say, what kind of advice can we give to our coaches and athletes about coming out of lockdown? What are some of the things that they should look out for? Or Dev, I'm going to direct this one to you. Like what are some of the components or principles that they should be doing? You touched a little bit on it in terms of, building up slowly. And I think you mentioned something around runners, by 3 weeks time, you should be getting, depending on how much training you've done before, but you should be getting back to that. Just give us some ideas and some tips around coming out of lockdown. What do you think would be advisable and safe?
Yeah, Sean, I think to go on your first part of that with coaches that are dealing with groups and maybe larger teams and that. Again, Carel's already mentioned in the sense that we don't necessarily have dates on when competitions are going to be. Nothing has been finalized yet. So there will be time to get back to training and to obviously try and plan and prep accordingly for that season. So to have a periodized plan or a systematic plan in process or in place rather, that'll allow us to plan accordingly to have the right training blocks and training phases that we need to get to hopefully a level of peak performance at that stage. If we had to go into a softer lockdown where maybe group sizes are going to be an issue, I think the biggest thing would be trying to, unfortunately, we'd probably be forced to have to stagger training sessions. So we might have to, if it's rugby, for instance, we might have to get the backline players to come to one training session and the forwards to come to one training session and try and focus things. Again, it'll probably allow us to try and focus a little bit better on technique, on specifics, on things that can be worked on while we have smaller groups. If it's squad type swim sessions, for instance, we might have to just cut the squads down, but there should be at least enough time for us to ease into it, plan accordingly, and try and focus on a couple of things that can work that you might not necessarily be able to touch on when you're dealing with a much bigger squad or a much bigger group, that now you can focus on with a slightly smaller group as well and actually still get some really good quality out of that training. I think if that answers that question.
Yeah, I think you've spot on with those kinds of answers, and yeah, I think coming out of this, different periodizations. Or I see a question here from Alex Michael who's asking, how have your athletes' periodizations been affected during this time? How have you modified it leading up to big events? So, I think Alex, from that point of view, I mean, there's so much uncertainty. Events haven't even been planned yet. So at the moment, I know, and again, I don't want to speak on the coach's behalf, but Dev, maybe you can elaborate a little bit from a swimming perspective of what's gone on. You guys were in peak kind of training leading up to nationals, and how you changed that periodization. I mean, obviously we don't know what's going to happen post lockdown, but how have you and the coach worked together to get that right?
Yeah, so in my scenario from the swimming side of things, obviously we've also had a couple of athletes that we were really on good track going into. We locked down literally a week before or 2 weeks before nationals was supposed to happen, and those are Olympic hopefuls, or had at least qualified for Olympics already. The thing with that though is it also allowed the coach to actually take a step back and realize, look, we forced into a situation like this. His plan for the year was generally, and I mean, I'm not necessarily wanting to speak on his behalf, but there's also a time where he's looked back and gone, well, we need to just change the framework of our year's plan and actually change where our off season typically would have been and put the athletes into a forced rest period now. So for the first couple of weeks was kind of a, right guys, chill at home and actually take a bit of time off, because you're in a flat out heavy training cycle. And now you're in a phase where, all right, we need to maybe step back. And this is a really good time to actually force some recovery on the athletes and then slowly start to bring it back again with the hope of, okay, things are probably going to happen later on in the year. With some of my athletes that I work with, from a cycling point of view, is I've had to almost, with some of the guys, just have a hard look at the season and realize, okay, the first half of the season is pretty much a write-off in terms of events being cancelled. So this gave us a good opportunity to start on a little bit of a base block again and have honest discussions about, all right, we might need to change what was going to be a goal event in May that might now need to be a goal event in October or November. So that again just changes the periodization and says, all right, it's not a write-off. We just need to say, right, let's go back into maybe a base block and start focusing on, if you have got access to an indoor trainer, to focus on a little bit of the endurance capacity. We can start to build a little bit of strength work with the guys doing some high resistance work on the bike, doing some strength stuff at home. Again, things that we generally might cut short later in a normal season because we generally don't have times with all the racing, all the events going on. We might make our base block a little bit shorter just because we're trying to cram a lot into the year. Where now, all right, we've been forced into this. Events are going to happen later in the year. now it almost allows us to have a slightly longer periodized plan, if that answers that question.
Yeah, spot on. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks, guys. There's quite a few more questions coming through here, so I think let's jump into a couple of these. Carel, I'm going to direct this one at you. This is from Leanne. Leanne's a Comrades runner, and obviously Comrades is hanging in the balance, and so, but she would have also been quite fit coming into lockdown. She says fit before lockdown, now experiencing a burning sensation in the lower legs after 4 kilometers in the garden. I don't have any pain afterwards. What is happening? And again, sorry, this is difficult because there's no assessments, and there's a lot of things we'd want to take into account, and you can't have that kind of interaction. But yeah, if you can give a bit of an indication.
Yeah, let's talk on the level, Shona. So yes, like you said, burning in the legs can be multiple reasons, and there can be big diagnoses behind that, which we don't want to do online. But if you go to an obvious reason, again, she can do a lot of mileage, but it comes down to how does the garden look? How often is she turning? I know a 4K is very easy, but if we take road runners into trail running, then we do a very gradual progression into it. Because you need to jump over obstacles, there's an increased muscle working, can I say. There's increased muscle strain. There's good evidence to show us that there's increased muscle damage even in trail running. So I don't know how a garden looks, and was he used to, obviously Comrades is doing nice linear patterns, getting a nice stride. Is she now doing a bit of a stop and start? But you shouldn't get a burning sensation after 4Ks. It could be from extended hours of sitting maybe as well. So there can be a few different reasons. I think it just comes back to it again, that we're doing different stuff now. So if you're doing something different and there's some kind of flare up or some kind of niggle, rather than say for the next week, I'm going to try something else. Like Dev said, you're not going to decondition like crazy. The cool thing will be now to stop your running. Don't let your legs burn. And maybe we're out of this lockdown in a week's time and you can continue much easily. But to now push it and it end up with what kind of neural injury in your back. I'm not saying it's that. And then you struggle quite a lot from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. You said, you want to come out of lockdown without an injury. So if that means backing off a little bit, and with Comrades, obviously we don't know when that date is going to be set, but you will definitely have more than enough time to build up fitness again before the race. And so I don't think there would be an absolute need to be smashing those kinds of distances even now in lockdown. Dev, I'm gonna direct this question back to you. This is around the detraining point you made in the very beginning. Sorry, I don't actually see who this is from, but when you said about maintaining 20% of your training can reduce detraining effect by 50%. He or she is asking, is this true even if you're not doing your normal training? So, i.e., if you're a runner and now you're doing purely strength, is that still the true concept, or do you have to be doing the modality that your body was used to?
Look, it's, again, I mentioned training stimulus. So if you take a training stimulus away, you're not training that particular component. So if you're a runner and you're not running, your running is going to detrain. If you're able to do an hour or 2 hours in a week, you probably can get away with a less detraining effect, if that makes sense. So if you aren't training, if you're not running at all, and strength is the only thing you can be doing, you might actually find, if you haven't done strength before, you're probably going to slowly start to progress and actually get stronger. And you might find that the strength side of things later on might help your running from a fatigue point of view, changing your form and your running gait pattern, as well as potential risk of injury. So keep in mind, yes, you are going to lose your endurance component. So if you take endurance training away, you'll lose endurance capacity. If you take intensity of training away, you're going to lose your VO2 max and your intensity sort of component. So there is going to be that effect, but you might actually find you benefiting from doing strength training alone, because now that strength training, provided you're doing it properly and you have progressed well, is that strength training is actually going to stand you in better stead for a slow progressive return to running. And hopefully that way you're not going to be picking up the little niggles that you might usually find. Maybe it's if it's lower back pain, or if it's a bit of knee pain, or whatever it might be. So this actually might be something where, hang on, you haven't had the time to do it before. Now you have been forced to do it. And hey, you'll find that your running actually might be in a slightly better position. I'm not saying that in the sense that you're going to be better runner, better pace, better fitness capacity when you get back. But I am saying it'll stand you in good stead with the progression, a slow return to running again.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I was going to add, I think if you're coming off with a good residual sort of amount of training or quality or quantity of training, coming out of this, you're not going to have lost that much. Yes, there will be a detraining effect, but you're exactly right. I was going to say, as a runner, working on some strength and then coming out of that, because you're going to be building those loads again of running on the road after this, having that strength base is going to be way more beneficial than any detraining effect that would have happened. So yeah, sorry, just really echoing what you're saying. My sports science hats came on and my hostess cap went off for a second there. But guys, last question, because I'm cognizant of time, and then we can just have little closing remarks from each of you. But Colin Hill's asking, says athletes seem to be recovering faster and feeling better after doing longer distances at home. Example, the 50 kilometers around the garden. Any explanation to this other than the fact that there's no elevation? Yeah, so I'll open up to both of you. If you guys want to give me a shortish kind of answer around those, you can go for it.
Yeah, I'll start, and Carel, you can maybe step in here. So for me, again, I don't necessarily know the background of these athletes, that how much training they are doing in this lockdown, but yes, might be doing an ultra distance run. Now, I am still standing pretty firm on the fact that I don't necessarily recommend this. And I definitely don't recommend it to someone who hasn't run those sort of distances in a week, let alone trying to do a 50K run once off in their garden. However, I would probably put that down to, or recovering from a 50K quicker, down to the fact that there's probably not a lot happening in that person's week in lockdown outside of that run. So probably getting better recovery at home by resting. So might get better fuel in, so good recovery meals maybe afterwards, putting their feet up, maybe watching a little bit of TV. And again, I don't necessarily know the instance here, but my guess largely around better recovery from something like that example would be purely a case that you're sitting at home and you have the benefit of actually recovering better afterwards and good rest.
Carel, your 2 cents, and then I'll also add mine.
I just want to say that the thing about removing elevation, in all our studies we're doing in trail running, elevation is constantly coming through as one of the biggest risks for injury. So it really loads your muscles. So just taking elevation out is already, but they've already answered the question from the other side, yeah.
Yep, good stuff. I agree on both points, 100%. I would also say that, when you're in a race environment, obviously your performance increases by 5%, they sort of say. So one, I think you're going to be competing at a little bit faster intensity, high intensity. You got the crowd, the adrenaline, everything's pumping. So I think the intensity of what they're doing at is probably a little bit less. And so, yeah, the detrimental effects on the physiology probably isn't as much. And I guess, yeah, also a question of, Dev, I think your point is exactly right. I mean, recovery is subjective as well. So, yep, that's just my 2 cents. Guys, yeah, it is 1 minute to 9. So the hour has gone really, really fast. I thought the 3 girls last week talking went pretty easy, but just chatting to the 2 boys tonight has gone just as easy. So I'm quite chuffed about that. Thanks, guys. Closing remarks from each of you. Dev, your final sort of thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think I've driven it home quite a bit, but I'm going to just go again. It's not all doom and gloom. We 3.5, nearly 4 weeks into this. In fact, tomorrow will be 4 weeks into it. We've got hopefully a week and a half of lockdown left. Don't be scared of rest. Don't be scared to take a little bit of time off. And hopefully this has been really good for your body as well, to get a little bit of that forced recovery, a little bit of regeneration, and also good for your mind as well, to at least take a focus away from really structured, constant training. So yeah, I think silver lining and not all doom and gloom is mine.
Awesome. Carel, your final words of wisdom and advice.
Yeah, I think it was a good time to think why we're doing sport. Now, I'm not doing trail running to run in my garden. I'm doing it to get out into the mountains. So I think what Dave also said now, try to maintain and try to get out of this period without injury. Because if this lockdown is over, hell, I want to get into the mountains as quick as possible. So I think it's just to maintain, don't get stressed, and let's wait for that lockdown to finish.
Awesome, Carel. Yeah, I echo both of my colleagues' sentiments there, and I think we've drilled home those points enough. It's not that we're saying don't do any forms of exercise. I think that is obviously key in this time. I think doubling up from the talk from last week, recognize the stress and the unknown stress that this is putting us under, and by loading the physiology and the stress there, it's just not going to be conducive to a healthy mind and body. So look after yourselves and your bodies and your minds, and take it easy in this time. Like Dev says, hopefully another week and a half of hard lockdown, but hopefully we can come out a little bit stronger on the other side. So guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the guys who are watching on the other end really do as well. For those of you who are watching, next week we will be same time, same place. Well, not really the same place. Everyone will be in their own homes, but it'll be with our 2 nutritionists. We'll be having a nutrition conversation all around the running to the fridge, the snacking, getting out of everything that we can to then complement, we've done the psychology, the physiology. Now we'll look at a bit of the nutrition side. So yeah, join us then. But yeah, thanks guys for your time, and yeah, we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks, Shona.
Cool. Should be good. Thank you guys.
Sorry guys, it's stressful, this thing. Once or twice I was like, I want to start talking. I'm like, shit, I don't know what the question was.
No, you nailed it. It was perfect. But yeah.
But also like I find myself just going off. Like I'm so bloody nervous and don't know that I'm gonna and then I feel like I might be repeating myself or whatever. Like I had Justin and Kurtley on the phone to me, tuning me about talking with my hands that I always give Justin cack about.
Oh, really?
So I've had them the whole bloody thing on the phones.
No, so sorry. It's my first time like this, but we'll improve.
No, you did well. Crushed it.
I think it was awesome. Yeah, so... Oh, what was that?
Huh?
I don't know. I heard a noise. Anyways, okay. Shot, guys. Thank you for your time. I think it was good. I mean, I can't see what it was like, so I hope it.
I don't want to look at it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, we'll see. And I'll sort out the video and stuff after this. Okay.
Cool.
Shot,
cool.
Have a lucky
evening.
evening. Thanks, man.
Bye.
Cheers.